Welcome to the Chronological Bible Journey, where we discover God's whole story one day at a time. I'm Ben. I'm here with Derek today, and we will be your guides as we discuss Song of Solomon. It's day 155, so let's jump in.
All right. Well, Ben, we're here. Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, whichever you prefer to call it. It's an interesting book that has many different interpretations.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we wanted to do today is just look at kind of those four main interpretations that people look at when they look at this book. It's called the Song of Solomon. Ben, read verse 1 for us. Let's make sure we understand who wrote the book.
Absolutely. It says, "This is Solomon's Song of Songs, more wonderful than any other."
So there are books in the Bible where we're like, we think so-and-so wrote it, kind of matches up with their other writings. We think. Some people say, well, I know who wrote Hebrews. They really don't.
They really don't, yeah.
Do you really know?
I don't know.
Okay. All right, good answer. But here in Song of Solomon, we know exactly who wrote it. Solomon, wisest man to ever live outside of Jesus himself. And the Lord had blessed him with wisdom. And so he writes this book. And here's a quote from the Old Testament handbook put out by Lifeway in 2023. They said, "No other book of the Bible, except perhaps Revelation, suffers under so many radically different interpretation as the Song of Songs." So many interpretations, but what's interesting about it, we can read a verse and you say, I think it means this. I say, I think it means, but it's super close. But when you look at these interpretations, some of them are so far.
Very different from one another.
Right, very different. So what we want to do is look at those four major interpretations. So the first one is an allegorical interpretation. We probably need to define allegorical since it's not a word we use in everyday.
Yeah, whenever you think about it's a use of literature or type of literature, when you have an allegorical approach, normally you will have a story or a poem or just the aspect of the writing that will have the natural meaning of what it means specifically in that context that it's written, but then maybe there's a hidden meaning that comes alongside it, or you assign another meaning to something that it wasn't originally meant for.
Yeah.
So that's kind of when we talk about allegorical interpretation, you're looking for that extra or hidden meaning that's in the text.
Right. And so there's a lot of people when they read this text, they believe that it's written about the Lord and the church, or the Lord and Israel. So Jews have taken it to be a picture of the love between Lord and Israel. Christians have taken it that hold to this interpretation and said this is Christ and the church. This view was very standard view from medieval times up until the Reformation. It takes different verses that you see in there talking about different aspects and attributes of the woman and applies it to either Israel or the church. Right. However, this is what's interesting. The New Testament never gives the song an allegorical interpretation. The New Testament passages that speak of the bride of Christ and Christ never point back to Song of Solomon.
Yeah, and I think that's an important aspect to point out. We have to be careful anytime that we try to apply or put meaning on something in Scripture that it is found nowhere else in Scripture. And so we have to be careful if we start applying allegorical approach to passages throughout the Old and New Testament, because what that means is that sometimes if Scripture never speaks to it, that's putting you as the reader and interpreter, you're the one that's assigning the meaning, not the Lord through Scripture. So we have to be careful with this type of approach to Scripture.
Yeah, and it reminds me, Brother Steve says the best type of illustration to use to prove Scripture is Scripture.
Right, use Scripture to interpret Scripture.
Right, exactly. So it is a interpretation that a lot of people have had in the past. Not as many people today hold this view, but there are still people. I know some people that hold this view. The second major interpretation of the Book of Song of Solomon is the dramatic interpretation. So for the past 200 years, many interpreters have argued that the song is a dramatic story. Some say it is a two-character drama, which would be between Solomon and the woman, and some would say that it's a three-character drama. Solomon, the woman, and a shepherd would be the main actors, if you will, in this drama. Neither approach is very convincing, one writer said. A romantic drama of this kind was altogether unknown in the ancient Near East. So we have not, found a romantic story like this in any other writing. So also, both interpretations are at many points forced and unnatural. So this doesn't seem to be
the one that we need to lean towards.
Right.
Yep.
So the third major view is the wedding song interpretation. I can see how someone could get here. Some have argued that the Song of Songs is a wedding song. Some scholars have studied Near Eastern wedding ceremonies and have pointed out there are a lot of similarities between that and the Song of Solomon. Even so, it's difficult to read the Song of Songs as an order of service for a wedding. I've read through it so many times, and even in preparation for today, just reading through it, it doesn't look like it's an order for a wedding. Even though the song is not the text of a wedding ceremony, it does indicate that the couple was getting married.
Right.
So we do see that in there. The fourth view is the love song interpretation. The preferred interpretation is the most simple and obvious. This would be, Ben, just for me personally, I don't want to speak on your behalf, this would be the interpretation that I would personally hold to. Song of Songs is a love song in three parts: a man, a woman, and then a chorus of women. It has no secret allegories or identifications. Now, Ben, when we say that, that doesn't mean that there's not truths that we can pull and we can apply to our lives. But there's not a hidden, what I see is that there's not a hidden message that it's Christ and the church or the Lord in Israel.
And I think when we think about that aspect of it, although the New Testament does not point to Song of Solomon as representing the relationship between Christ and the church, we do see that in Ephesians that the Apostle Paul, he uses the illustration of marriage to talk about the relationship between Christ and the church. And so I think even although we may not be able to assign that meaning to the Song of Solomon, that's where you're talking about you can bring some of those truths out of that. Just as Solomon was pursuing this woman, his love, that is how we should pursue Christ in a lot of ways. We should have that active pursuit going after Christ with all of our heart.
Yep. It's a good word. It tells no story and has no plot. It's a lyrical expression of romantic love between a couple who are in the process of marrying. Its language and imagery, which go from royal pomp and majesty to the rustic pastoral setting of the meadow, are meant to convey all the grandeur and glory as well as the simplicity and natural beauty of love, is what one writer said. And I really like how they put that. Another writer said, the Song of Songs is romantic Hebrew love poetry describing the intimate goodness of the marriage relationship. And I want to read that one more time because I think that is really pretty much exactly where I sit when I look at this. So this writer says, the Song of Songs is a romantic Hebrew love poetry describing the intimate goodness of the marriage relationship. So when we look at this book, it would be easy for us to just look, and if we say, okay, we hold to this view that this is just a love song, it'd be easy to say, well, we really don't need this. Why did the Lord leave it in here? I could see if you hold to that very first view that we talked about, the allegorical view, that you would say, no, this is extremely important book. But we have to be careful sometimes when we take a view that we don't let that view dictate whether or not it is more important or less important.
It's all
from what I can see. Every word in here is what God has given us and what is needed. And so I look at this and I think that there's so many things that we can gather from this. I think about my own marriage. I think about the gift that it is to me. I think about how the Lord has blessed me to be married for 16 years. And I'm looking at 17 years here in just a couple months and how blessed I am for that. And I think about Solomon pursuing this woman. I lean towards this probably being his first wife. Now, you got to remember there was a
lot more after that.
There's a lot more after that. But I think that this was maybe his first wife, and he was pursuing her. And I love the connection that you made with Paul in Ephesians talking about pursuing Christ. When I look and read here about Solomon pursuing this woman and how much he desired her and loved her, I do have to stop and ask myself, first of all, do I pursue my wife like that?
Right.
But then I also can step back and look at my own relationship with the Lord and say, do I pursue Christ like that? And you know what? It's pretty convicting.
Yeah, it is. We sometimes, we go all the way to Revelation. I think it was the church of Ephesus that says, Jesus said, you have left your first love. And I think if this was Solomon's first love, eventually all those different wives caused him to leave that first love. And if we're not careful, passionately pursuing our own wives or our spouse, then we may lose love for that first love that we had.
Yeah.
Or if we don't passionately pursue Christ, our love for him may wane over time. It's a great reminder for us.
is.
And I just want to encourage husbands and wives, love each other. The book of the Song of Solomon is a good testimony. Read it and find ways to encourage your husband, your wife, and love them the way that Christ has commanded us to throughout Scripture. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.